Harlem, New York City. 1952. The neighborhood breathes like a living thing. Steam rises from iron grates in the sidewalk, curling upward into the cold January air. Jazz drifts from second-floor windows, the sound of saxophones and trumpets mixing with the noise of traffic, laughter, and arguments spilling out from crowded apartments. Children run between parked cars. Women hang laundry from fire escapes. Old men sit on stoops with newspapers and coffee, watching the street the way sailors watch the ocean, reading currents invisible to everyone else. This is Harlem. Not the Harlem that newspapers in downtown Manhattan write about. Not the Harlem that politicians discuss in their offices. Not the Harlem that tourists photograph from moving taxis. This is the real Harlem, the one that breathes and suffers and sings and fights, the one that has produced geniuses and saints and killers and everything in between, the one that has survived every attempt by outside forces to break it, to gentrify it, to erase it. And at the center of this, Harlem, like a dark sun around which everything else orbits, stands one man, Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, known in every apartment building, every church, every back room and barbershop and card game in Upper Manhattan by a single name, Bumpy. Bumpy Johnson is 44 years old in the winter of 1952. He stands 5 feet 10 inches tall and weighs 190 pounds, most of it muscle, none of it wasted. His face is a landscape of controlled experience, dark skin marked by decades of confrontation, eyes that are simultaneously warm and absolutely terrifying depending on what they have decided to see in you. He wears pressed suits. He tips generously. He quotes Shakespeare at dinner tables and discusses philosophy with professors who come uptown to drink with him because the conversation downtown bores them. He has been to federal prison. He has been shot 3 times. He runs numbers, controls territory, and has been described by law enforcement as the most dangerous man in Harlem since the 1930s. He is also, by any account from anyone who has ever observed it firsthand, a man of particular and unwavering moral code. A man who feeds families during hard winters. A man who pays for children's funerals when parents cannot afford them. A man who once shut down a drug operation in his own territory because the supplier started selling to school children, shut it down personally, brutally and permanently, despite the financial loss to himself. Bumpy Johnson believes in rules, his rules, and the most important of those rules was never written down and never needed to be. Every soul in Harlem already knew it without being told. You do not touch the innocent. You do not touch the children. In the autumn of 1951, a 7-year-old boy named Marcus appeared in Harlem the way many children appeared in Harlem in those years. No announcement, no fanfare, no one looking for him. His mother had died of tuberculosis in a rooming house on 127th Street. His father was unknown or absent. The records were unclear. The authorities were unconcerned. Marcus spent 3 weeks sleeping in different places: a church basement, a neighbor's kitchen floor, a doorway on Lenox Avenue when the church and the neighbor both ran out of space and patience. He was 7 years old, alone, and Harlem in winter was not a place designed to be gentle with 7-year-old boys who had no one. Bumpy Johnson found him on a Tuesday morning sitting on the steps of a barbershop, wearing shoes with holes in both soles, eating half a bread roll that one of the barbers had given him. Bumpy was on his way to a meeting. He stopped. He looked at the boy for a long moment. The boy looked back without flinching, without crying, without begging, just looked back with the particular dignity that children carry naturally before the world teaches them to abandon it. Bumpy sat down on the step beside him. They talked for 40 minutes. Bumpy missed his meeting. By the end of the week, the paperwork was in motion. Bumpy Johnson was not a man who did things halfway, and he was not a man whose requests moved slowly through any system, legal or otherwise. Within 6 weeks, Marcus was living in Bumpy's household on Edgecombe Avenue, enrolled in school, fed, clothed, and sleeping in a bed for the first time in 4 months. Bumpy's wife, Mamie, welcomed the boy with the warmth she had always extended to children in need. Marcus was not a novelty or a charity case. He was family. That was the word Bumpy used with everyone who asked, and the tone in which he used it made clear that the question did not need to be revisited. Word spread through Harlem the way all important information spread through Harlem. Not through newspapers, not through official announcements, through conversations, through the barbershop network, through the church networks, through the sidewalk networks that connected every block to every other block, through whispers and nods and pauses that meant more than sentences. Bumpy Johnson had taken in the orphan boy. The boy was under his protection. Bumpy had made the child his own. For most of Harlem, this was unremarkable. Bumpy took care of people. It was simply understood. For 13 men, over the course of the following year, it became the last mistake they ever made. The first incident occurred in March. A man named Gerald, who ran a small operation out of a pool hall on 125th Street, made the error of grabbing Marcus roughly by the arm in an alley and demanding to know if the boy had been watching his movements. Marcus was 8 years old. He had been watching nothing, had been walking home from school, had taken a shortcut through the alley that happened to pass near Gerald's pool hall. Gerald was nervous, paranoid, involved in transactions he did not want observed, and he grabbed the child hard enough to leave bruises on a 7-year-old arm. Marcus told no one. Children often don't. They absorb what happens to them and carry it quietly to protect the adults around them from worry. Bumpy found out through a woman who ran a number station in the building across from the alley. She had seen it happen from her window. She mentioned it, as she mentioned most things she observed, during her weekly accounting with Bumpy's lieutenant. The information traveled up the chain in one afternoon. Gerald was visited that evening. He was not visited aggressively, not at first. Bumpy believed in giving a man the opportunity to understand what he had done wrong. One of Bumpy's senior men explained the situation to Gerald calmly and completely. Gerald panicked. Gerald made a second mistake, which was reaching for a weapon during that conversation. Gerald did not reach a third time. Word went out through the same networks that had carried the news of Marcus's adoption. The information was simple, unembellished, and delivered without theater. A man had put his hands on Bumpy's boy. That man was dead. This was not a warning. This was simply the natural consequence of the action, stated as fact. The second incident came in May, and the third in June. Each time the pattern was slightly different in its specifics and absolutely identical in its outcome. Men who believed their own grievances, their own deals, their own territorial disputes justified involving a child in adult business discovered that Bumpy Johnson operated on a principle that had no exceptions built into it. By August, 8 men had learned the principle directly and finally. Their associates and colleagues and rivals had all heard the accounting. The mathematics were clear. The mathematics were brutal. And still, because human beings are capable of extraordinary miscalculation when fear and desperation combine in the right proportions, 5 more men attempted variations of the same error over the following 4 months. The 13th man made his attempt on a cold Tuesday in December. His name was Raymond. He was not from Harlem. He was connected to an outfit operating out of Brooklyn, men who were attempting to expand their territory northward, who had decided that placing pressure on Bumpy Johnson's household was a lever worth pulling. Raymond was sent, along with 2 others, to find the boy Marcus and to use him as a demonstration, a message delivered through the simplest and most ancient method of applying pressure to a powerful man, to touch the thing he loves. Raymond and his 2 companions found Marcus walking home from school in the early afternoon, on a sidewalk 5 blocks from Edgecombe Avenue. What happened next was witnessed by 11 people on that sidewalk and the adjacent stoops. Bumpy Johnson appeared around the corner 30 seconds after Raymond stepped toward the boy. He had no warning. He had no advance intelligence about the plan. He had been in the neighborhood that afternoon by coincidence, visiting a man who owed him an accounting, and he rounded the corner and he saw Raymond's hand moving toward his son. The witnesses later described varying things about the 30 seconds that followed. Some could not describe it at all, said their minds had simply refused to fully record what they were seeing. Some described it in clinical terms, movement and result. Others, those who had been in Harlem long enough to have developed the specific vocabulary for these moments, described it the way you describe a natural force, not the action of a man making decisions and executing them. The action of something that had already been decided at a level below decision, like a river that has been dammed for 20 years releasing. Raymond and his 2 companions were not killed on that sidewalk. Bumpy Johnson did not work that way in public, not in front of children, not in front of women and old men on stoops. What happened on the sidewalk was sufficient to end the immediate problem permanently and to communicate everything necessary to everyone present without escalating further. Raymond and both companions were later found in circumstances that required no further investigation by anyone in Harlem. Brooklyn received the message without ambiguity. Wednesday morning in Harlem, a day after the 13th man had made his error. The neighborhood absorbs the night before, the way it always absorbs everything, with the particular resilience of a community that has learned to continue functioning through events that would stop other places entirely. The barber shops open, the number stations begin their morning collections, the churches ring their bells, the children walk to school, Marcus walks to school. He is 8 years old, wearing a coat that fits properly, carrying a school bag that has all the books he needs in it. His shoes have no holes. He has eaten breakfast. He will eat dinner tonight. He knows the name of every person on every stoop on his route to school because they know his name, because he has been introduced to all of them by a man who made introductions the way other men sign contracts, formally, permanently, with the full weight of his word behind every syllable. Bumpy Johnson walks beside him for the first 3 blocks. This is not unusual. He does this several mornings a week when his schedule allows. They talk about school, about a book Marcus has been reading, about a question Marcus has asked that Bumpy has spent 2 days thinking about how to answer honestly. The question was, why do people hurt other people? Bumpy walked in silence for half a block after hearing that question the first time Marcus asked it. Then he said, "I will think about that and tell you something true. Not something easy, something true." Now walking in the cold December morning, he tells him, "Because most people are afraid," Bumpy says. And fear is the thing that makes men small when they were built to be large. Every man who ever hurt someone weaker than himself was afraid of something. Afraid of losing what he had. Afraid of being seen as weak. Afraid of the future. Fear convinces a man that cruelty is strength, that taking is the same as having. But it is the opposite. A man who has to hurt the innocent to feel powerful is the smallest kind of man there is. He is not strong. He is empty. Marcus thinks about this for a moment. Then he asks, "Were you ever afraid?" Bumpy looks down at him. His face, which has been described by law enforcement, journalists, rivals, and allies as impenetrable, does something unusual. It opens slightly, enough to let the answer through without armor. "Every day when I was young," he says. "Every single day. And then one day I decided the fear was not useful. So I put it somewhere I did not have to look at it constantly, and I started moving forward. That is not the same as not being afraid. It is just choosing not to let the fear steer." They stop at the corner where Marcus turns toward school. The boy looks up at him. There are things the boy understands about the man beside him that no 8-year-old should have to understand. There are also things he simply cannot understand yet because he is 8 years old and life has not finished teaching him. What he understands that morning on the corner is this: he is safe. He will continue to be safe. Not because the world is gentle, which it is not because cruelty does not exist, which it does, but because the man standing beside him has made a decision about this child's safety that is not subject to revision or negotiation or the shifting tides of business and territory and politics. The decision is permanent. It was made on a Tuesday morning on a barbershop step when 2 people sat down and talked for 40 minutes, and something was recognized by both of them without language. Marcus goes to school. Bumpy watches until the boy turns the corner and disappears. Then he turns and walks back toward Edgecombe Avenue. 2 of his men fall into step beside him, the standard formation, nothing unusual for a Tuesday morning on a Harlem sidewalk in 1952. One of them, a man who has worked with Bumpy for 11 years and has seen things that fill the specific vocabulary that Harlem keeps for these occasions, says quietly, "That business from yesterday, it is handled completely." Bumpy nods once. The man continues, "People are asking about it, wondering if we expect any response from Brooklyn." Bumpy is quiet for a moment. Then he says, "No response will come from Brooklyn. Men who send other men to touch children have already demonstrated that they lack the judgment to survive in this business. They know that now. Confusion only lasts until clarity arrives. Clarity arrived yesterday." They walk another half block in silence. Then Bumpy says, "Make sure Marcus gets extra help with his mathematics this week. He told me he is struggling with division. I want someone capable sitting with him on Thursday evening." The man nods, considers this for a moment, nods again. This is Bumpy Johnson. This is the thing that people who only read the law enforcement files and the newspaper records never fully understood about him. The files showed the violence. They documented the territory and the numbers operation and the federal charges and the prison time and the body count that accumulated around him over 3 decades. The mathematics of the world he operated in, and the prices paid by those who violated his particular and unwavering moral code. What the files did not show was the Thursday evening mathematics tutoring, the school bag with all the books, the shoes with no holes, the coat that fit properly, the breakfast eaten and dinner waiting, the 40 minutes on a barbershop step in November when 2 people recognized something in each other and a decision was made. In the years that followed, Marcus would grow up in Bumpy Johnson's household. He would go to school and then to more school. He would carry with him things that cannot be taught in classrooms, things absorbed through years of watching a complicated man navigate a complicated world according to a code that was impossible to fully articulate, but absolutely consistent in its application. He would understand, in the way that children who survive difficult things often understand, that safety is not the absence of danger. It is the presence of someone who has decided, without conditions, that you will be protected. Bumpy Johnson died in 1968 of a heart attack in his favorite restaurant in Harlem. He died surrounded by the neighborhood he had ruled and fed and fought for across 3 decades. The neighborhood mourned him the way it mourns anyone who belonged to it completely. Loudly, quietly, in churches and back rooms and barbershop conversations that went on for weeks. Marcus was in his mid-20s by then. He attended the funeral. He stood in the back of the church and did not speak to journalists or officials or any of the various people who descended on Harlem to write about the end of an era. He stood in the back and he remembered a corner where a man stopped every morning and watched until the boy disappeared around it. He remembered a question asked and a promise made to answer it truthfully. He remembered the answer. Every man who ever hurt someone weaker than himself was afraid of something. And the corollary, which Bumpy never stated, but which Marcus understood through years of watching it, demonstrated without explanation. Every man who ever protected someone weaker than himself had found something worth being stronger than his fear. In Harlem, the story of Bumpy's children was never told in a single place or in a single way. It lived in pieces, distributed across the networks and conversations and sidewalk vocabularies of the neighborhood. In barbershops, someone would reference the 13 men without naming all of them, knowing the listener already knew the number and what it meant. In churches, someone would mention the boy who became a man who became something the neighborhood could be proud of, without explaining the backstory that everyone already carried. In the specific and particular memory of Harlem, which is longer and more reliable than any official record and more honest than most newspapers, the story was simple. It did not require embellishment or documentation or verification from anyone who was not there. 13 men tried to touch Bumpy's child. Not one of them survived the attempt. And a boy with holes in his shoes sat on a barbershop step and ate half a bread roll and looked at a powerful man without flinching. And the powerful man sat down beside him and missed a meeting he was on his way to attend. And 40 minutes later, without either of them fully understanding yet what had just been decided, the boy had a father and the man had a son. That is not a crime story. That is not a story about territory or numbers or the violence that accumulates around powerful men in places that have been abandoned by every institution that was supposed to care for them. That is a story about a Tuesday morning, about a step outside a barbershop. About what happens when someone powerful enough to look away chooses to stop and sit down instead. The legend does not require documentation, it only requires truth. And in Harlem, in 1952, on a cold Tuesday morning in November, the truth was simply this. A boy was alone, and a man decided he would not be anymore. Everything else followed from that.